Well, hello and welcome to our short little video series on the Passion Week. What we're doing is taking a portion of scripture and just kind of walking with Jesus through his week from Palm Sunday to the resurrection that is celebrated on Easter. Jesus spent a lot of time in Jerusalem. Actually, what I want to say is Scripture devotes a lot of coverage to the short time Jesus spent in Jerusalem. And we're just going to look at some of those highlights. And even though our days may not be exactly right, these are all conversations Jesus had with different individuals during the week from Palm Sunday to Easter. And so I want to start with Jesus coming to the temple right after he walks the road on Palm Sunday. And so I'm going to read two portions of scripture. One will be out of John's Gospel, then a little bit out of Matthew, and then back to John's Gospel. And so in John chapter 2, which is really early in John's Gospel, we see Jesus going into the temple. Now, it's probably that John put it here not in chronological order, but really to establish what Jesus really was about when he was in his earthly ministry. And but it probably is the same occasion of Jesus going into the temple that we see near the end of the other Gospels. But it doesn't matter. It's still the ministry of Jesus speaking to the issue of the temple and its condition. So in John's Gospel, it reads like this. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And he found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers doing business. When he had made a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money and overturned the tables. And he said to those who sold doves, and I'm going to pause there, and we're just going to read that little version out of Matthew's Gospel. And he says, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." And then we come back to John's Gospel, and it's just that I think John's Gospel really unpacks this well. It says, verse 17, "Then his disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your father's house has eaten me up. So the Jews answered and said to him, what sign do you show us since you do these things? Jesus answered and said to them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Then the Jews said, it has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days? But he was speaking of the temple of his body. Therefore, when he had risen from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this to them, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had said." Well, what we see here is Jesus was very disappointed when he came to the temple. In fact, we could say he got downright angry at the condition of the temple. And he quoted a couple of scriptures, and one comes from Isaiah 56, verse 7, where it says, "Them will I bring to my holy hill and give them joy in my house of prayer. Their offerings and sacrifices shall be accepted on my altar there. My temple shall be called a house of prayer for every nation." Well, God had a great vision and great plans. And his vision was to raise up a nation called the nation of Israel and build a temple and put his presence in there. And then he wanted people from all over the world to be able to come and experience him, and experience his closeness, experience answer to prayer, experience his acceptance. But what happened was Israel ended up guarding the temple. They ended up writing rules on who could and who could not attend, and the exact opposite happened. The temple became a place where people were alienated from. In Acts 21:28, the Apostle Paul was actually accused by other Jews for bringing Gentiles to the temple. And they used that as a reason to disqualify Paul, when in fact he was actually doing the very thing the Lord had asked him to do. There was archaeologists who found on the temple and around the boundary of the temple grounds some pillars that bore this inscription: "Any foreigner who ignores the warnings and goes beyond this point shall have no one but himself to blame for the death which shall be his penalty." Can you imagine that? God had intended the temple to be a place where all nations could come and pray, and this boundary markers were put in place threatening those people, foreigners, that if they did come and pray, they would lose their life. So we really see a discrepancy here in what God intended and what ended up happening. In Jeremiah 7:11 it says, "In this house, which is called by my name, became a den of robbers in your eyes." And so Jesus referenced that and was telling the leaders, this is what you have done. You have fulfilled the prophecy of Jeremiah. So Jesus pronounces that he will, if they destroy that temple, he will build a new one. And the new one will be built on him as a foundation, and it will really be in his people will now be the ones that carry God's presence. But that brings me to this point in our current day. Just as a foreigner would have really felt unwelcome and uninvited, and in fact scorned for going to the temple, I wonder if today something has happened in a similar fashion where the church becomes a very unwelcoming place for people. And maybe you've had a friend to invite you to watch these videos, and maybe you had that experience. And what you would really like is to just find a place or a person that can help you connect with God. Well, Jesus intends for the church and the people of his church to be such a person where we would be out into the marketplace and inviting people to meet God through prayer. In the Old Testament, many of the Jews required that you would become a Jew before you could make sacrifice and talk to God. And in today, much of the church requires that you become a church member before you can have a conversation with God. But I actually think the heart of Jesus is that he would love for a person who's perhaps of another world religion, let's just say a person who is a Buddhist, that Jesus would love to have a conversation with that person before they change their identity, to reveal himself for who he really is, and that he can work that out with them. And I would like to encourage you as well, that wherever you are, whoever you are, and whatever you've done, today is the perfect day for you to have a conversation with the Lord and come to his holy presence. He will accept you, he'll have a conversation with you, and he can lead you every step of the way for the rest of your life. Well, thank you for viewing this. We'll have another video for tomorrow, and I hope this was a blessing to you. God bless you.